Okay, giving credit where credit is due, I happened to be scanning around on the internet a couple of weeks ago, and one of the most difficult things about DMR radio I found was that it has advanced so quickly that if you find information on the internet that is more than maybe 6 months old, maybe 10 or 15% of it is no longer appropriate and accurate. If you find anything that's more than 2 years old, forget about it. It just is probably totally outdated. But these guys out towards California way did a pretty good job of putting together a PowerPoint. So I use it as the basis, and we're going to talk about what DMR is. Mostly, I'm going to talk about the terms because the terminology really, if you're a brand new, newly licensed ham, the terms don't bother you because you've never learned the analog terms for talking on the radio. But it's a whole new set of terms. We're going to talk a little bit about code plugs because once you learn the terms, you've read enough that the code plugs and the drama around a code plug scares you away. So you've just ordered a new radio and you never pick it up from FedEx. You just send it right back because there's no way I'm going to deal with a code plug. And it's not really all that bad. And we'll talk about a few more things. So we're going to start with, everybody here is at least as old as me, except for one or two. So you kind of know some of the basics like that our modes are CW, etc. And one of the things about DMR, it uses a lot of internet, and an awful lot of people will say, well, that's not ham radio because it uses the internet. And my response to that is, let's all go back to CW. Forget about everything after CW. We'll go back to that, but I don't think that's going to work. So we add DMR to the various modes, and the digital modes include CW. The oldest and earliest was the first digital. And in addition to the CW, back in the, I guess, early mid 80s, we added packet radio, and we all had our, I think it was like a PS 123 or something, and that was the most awesome thing. And then in the last few years, in response to the use of DMR radio, which was really started by Motorola as a commercial use of the radio, some of the manufacturers have come out with ham radio alternatives using digital radio. And two of them are Fusion and D-Star. They are not DMR radio, but they are digital radio. And the VHF, UHF digital modes are packets, Fusion, D-Star, and DMR. And which of those are FM? Well, packet, Fusion, and D-Star are FM. Does that mean that DMR is not FM? Well, it's not FM in the way that we have used it in the past. The term, for example, fusion radio, which I'm not going to talk about at all other than make this comment, uses all 25 kilohertz available on bandwidth available to FM, if that's the mode that you choose to be in. Or you can do 12.5, or on Fusion you can do 6.25 kilohertz. But in true DMR radio, a DMR signal occupies the 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth, but that's divided into two, if you will, channels. And those channels are, and my phone should be blocked. It's not. The channels are blocked. The channels are divided into time slots. So the transmission switches between those time slots so quickly that you can't tell that there is a switch when you're listening to it. So theoretically, two conversations can be going on at the same time on the same frequency, and nobody's going to be able to be any wiser on it because each of those conversations using only 6.25 kilohertz of the available bandwidth. This is a graphic kind of talking about that splitting of the signal. It's literally going back from time slot 1 to time slot 2 to time slot 1, time slot 2. And that is an important part, as you'll see, in setting up your digital radio, because each repeater and or each hotspot is going to tell you which time slot that you should be on when you're using their equipment. So remember the time slot thing. It's the first of the terminology that you're going to be learning tonight. DMR has been around for a while. The first tier 1 were those early commercial radios, single channel, and you talk back and forth. The engineer talked to the conductor, and the conductor talked to the engineer, and hopefully they didn't back up over anybody when they were making their cut in the train. Tier 2 is what a amateur radio is, and that's a 2 time slot time division radio. Tier 3 is for all the scanner fans. Tier 3 is the trunking protocol that was introduced a number of years ago, where you can't listen to the dispatcher and the car responding to the local riot because of the trunked system. So when you're thinking about getting into DMR, or if you're talking to somebody about your experiences with DMR, there's a number of terms that you're going to hear, and we're going to cover those as we move along. The talk groups, channels, zones, color codes. Oh my God, not a code plug. Scanning, roaming. Everybody knows what simplex is, I hope. And what is the admit criteria? A talk group. Well, it was kind of easy but difficult to keep in my mind what a talk group was. You might want to think of a talk group as a room or a group of rooms that are entered when you key them up. So you walk into that room by hitting the transmit key on your radio after you've established all the criteria that's going to unlock that room. Only one talk group can be using a local repeater's time slot at a time. But if that repeater has both time slot 1 and time slot 2 available, then both of those time slots can be used. If your radio is not programmed to listen to a talk group, you're not going to hear anything. You won't hear that particular talk group, or if you're not properly programmed to get into that repeater, you're not going to hear anything. And that's one of the important differences between the digital and the analog mode, is that when you buy an analog radio, I remember my first ICOM radio, IC2AT, and I had to set a couple of switches, and that was getting me into the local repeaters. A lot more to it on a digital radio. You might also want to think of a talk group as a internet access instruction. How am I going to tie into that radio, which is going to get me into the internet, which is going to get me to another repeater, which is going to get me to another repeater? It's kind of the key to get into the internet. For example, one of the repeaters that I use, there are only 2 that I can hit up with my handy talkie here in Old Orchard Beach, Maine. One is in Shapley, and the other one is in Portland. It's actually just north of Portland. Typically, I use the Shapley repeater because I have relatives out in Shapley, and so I'm more prone to that. So if I want to use the talk group number 3172, which is the Northeast area, I set up all of the necessary criteria, and I tell the repeater, okay, I'm looking to talk to 3172, and the repeater connects via the internet to all the repeaters that are programmed for that 3172 talk group. And that could well be in the hundreds of repeaters. The Northeast, I have some interest in the Southeast because I have have had a home in Florida and will have a home again in Florida. And so I'm aware of what's going on down there. And a lot of the repeaters are tied into the Northeast 3172 talk group. So when I key up on the 3172 talk group on the Shapley repeater, which is only 25 miles from here, I could be sending, like I said, to repeaters all up and down the East Coast and wherever else they're tuned in. They're not limited by distance, they're just limited by connection factors, if you will. Next term is a channel. A channel is a specific talk group on a specific repeater. When I set up my radio, it was set up for the main area DMR MARC repeater network. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And virtually every one of the Maine and a couple of New Hampshire and actually one Canada repeater was set up on that code plug, and all of the talk groups were assigned to different channels for the different repeaters. So if I wanted to be on 3172 in the New Brunswick repeater, it would be the NB Northeast repeater. It's the same talk group, but the channel is set up for the repeater that I'm going through. But we talked about that. The Northeast 3172 on the Shapley repeater gets me there as long as I have the correct color code, another term we're going to talk about, and the correct time slot. The owner or the person responsible for the repeater is the person who is going to allocate the various color codes and time slots to that repeater and to the different talk groups. Next on the list of terms is zones. That little handy talk I have sitting over on my left over here has currently, I believe it's about 23 zones set up in it. A zone is a grouping of individual channels. So I have the zone that has all the channels for the Shapley repeater. I have a zone that has all of the channels for the New Brunswick repeater and a number of other zones. A modern DMR radio, something built in the last couple of years, can support thousands of channels, and those channels could be set up in any one of the zones that you have. And my radio will handle, I don't know, I have 30 channels in some of the zones. So it's a pretty amazing little computer. And as I mentioned earlier, a channel can be used in more than one zone. Color codes, a term that's easy to understand if you're an experienced ham operator, because a color code is the digital way of saying what tone is going to get you into the repeater. It's the essential digital equivalent of your CTCSS or DCS access code tone. A color code does not refer to, for example, you don't type into your program, this is the blue color code. It's literally a number from color code 0 to color code 15. It's not optional on DMR systems. You must use a color code. Unlike analog repeaters, some people don't want to have a access tone, that's fine. But in digital, you must have an access code, a color code. Obviously, if it's not set correctly, you're not going to be able to get into the repeater. And code plugs. Oh my God, we're not going to talk about code plugs. Yes, we are. As I said earlier, code plugs are the bane of the existence of all new and fairly new entries into the digital market. let's see, today's Tuesday. Sunday, I was on Facebook. I guess they call pages for DMR Radio. And one guy said, I got my DMR Radio on Friday from Federal Express. I sat down with it for 5 hours on Saturday. I just called the shipping department at the company I bought it from, and I'm sending it back. This is too much for me. Do you think they should really charge me a 20% restocking fee? So it was a little bit overwhelming for that individual. But a code plug is really something simple. And I'll use the word simple a couple of times if I remember to, because your initial code plug should be simple. You don't need to program in every repeater and every hotspot between here and California. You just need to set up the local repeaters with a couple of channels on there and take it from there. Building a code plug can take many hours. I have the doors closed in my office here, so my wife can't poke her head in and confirm this in her inimitable way of doing that. But just making a few changes to my code plug, I can find that I've just spent maybe 2 or 3 hours sitting at the computer having a ball, but it definitely can eat up some time. So perhaps the best practice is to acquire a good working code plug for the radio you have with the desired coverage area. There are multiple ways of getting the code plug. You might have a friend who's on the local DMR network, and if you're lucky, they have the same radio, and the code plug that that person has can just be imported into yours, and that's a good starting point. I bought my radio, which is a Anytone radio, and there are many manufacturers, from Bridgecom Systems. And the bottom line in that slide, if you're interested in this and need to get a code plug, that's the website for their code plug access page. And I believe, no, I know, that's where I got mine originally, and it worked out pretty good for me. A few changes were necessary, but I have another couple of websites later on that you can also take a look at. But that website will get you a code plug for just about probably 2/3 of the states, and be a great place to start. Scanning. DMR radios, like analog radio, will allow you to scan, but you have to configure your scanning channels. When you're putting the information into your radio, into the CPS, the code plug software, computer programming software, nobody seems to know what CPS stands for, but that's the term you'll hear. You have to enter it into a number of places depending upon what you want your radio to do with it. So you program it into the channel and into the zone, but if you want to scan certain of those channels, you then have to enter it into the scanning coding in the code plug. But you'll only hear the channels that you actually add to your scanning options. And you can scan various things. I can scan, I think, probably about 10 different combination of channels. So it's quite flexible. The radio that I have has a dual receive capability. So oftentimes I'll have both the A channel and the B channel set up, and I'm scanning the local analog repeaters while I'm really focusing more on the DMR. The last one, the writers of this, the creators of this program put that down. I don't know that that's a big thing, but it does allow me to mention something about battery life. Scanning will decrease the battery life in your radio. The reason being the time slots, because you're only transmitting perhaps half of the time. If somebody's not on time slot 1 and time slot 2, then your transmission is, again, only half the time. So your radio is literally resting half the time. I have a 2100 milliamp hour, I guess it's called, battery on this radio, and the radio by my side here, and it's got 3 bars out of a 4-bar display, and I haven't charged it since Saturday. So the battery life on a DMR radio is amazing. Because a lot of the channels, the major channels, the ones that we, for example, have a DMR net on Monday nights at, I think it's 7:30 to 8:30, and we have folks checking in from Massachusetts to New Brunswick, Rhode Island. We have folks in Connecticut, and that New England talk group is literally being broadcast throughout all the New England states and up into Canada. There's an awful lot of potential people listening, but if a conversation is carried on that channel, there's an awful lot of people who are inconvenienced by it. So there are a number of TAC channels, and they're, technically speaking, the TAC stands for tactical, but that's a good place to go. If Pi and I hook up on the New England talk group, and we're going to have a more than a couple of minute conversation, it would be advisable to go to maybe TAC 1 or TAC 2. Very much like good ham operations on analog, you're going to go simplex if you're close enough and not tie up the repeater. Of course, that's all if it all worked out right. One of the terms on that list of DMR terminology is the admit criteria. When you're setting up your code plug and you're setting up the various things for the channels you're creating, you obviously set up the bandwidth, and you set up the fact that it's digital. You set up your color code, you set up your time slot, and one of the options is admit criteria. One of the ones that I would call the root option is always. What does that mean? That means that anytime that you push your transmit button, even if 2 people are already talking, you're going to go in there and double with them. So it's nice to have an option that maybe if you're the control operator or whatever, you want to get on top of folks, but I never use that. I always use channel free. If the channel is quiet, I don't have to worry about doubling on somebody because I'm not going to be able to talk over them. Why would you want to use same color code or different color code? Because sometimes I have the Shapley repeater and the Portland repeater, and they both have, for example, the New England talk group on there. They have different color codes, so I'm not keying up both repeaters at the same time. Wouldn't make sense. So that's why I might want to make sure, for example, if I'm scanning, I want to make sure that I'm using the same color code to stay on color code 7, or I want to not key up something, so I want to use a different color code. One more term, one more complexity, but one more complexity adds to the versatility of DMR radio. This is more about moving off the wide-ranging talk group. So what do you need to know to program a memory channel on an analog radio? Well, you all know that. You need to know what frequency you want, the offset. Is it a plus or minus offset? Is it an access tone or DCS tone? What do you need to know to program a memory channel on a DMR radio? You need to know the frequency, the offset, plus or minus, the color code, same as the tone, and the time slot 1 and time slot 2. So that's not a whole lot more. Oh, wait a minute, maybe there is a little bit more. You need to have a channel name. You need, when you're setting up your code plug, you need to set up a name that is going to strike a bell when you see it and you know exactly what you're talking about, because I am now at 140, I think 146 channels. So when I pick one to transmit on, I really want to know where I'm at. You need to know what is the appropriate talk group when you're setting up your channel. Do you want to scan this channel, and what other channels do you want to scan it with at the same time? Usually you want something cohesive so that it makes sense that you're scanning, for example, all of the channels that are talking about aeronautics or maybe nautical channels. What admit criteria will you use? A really neat thing about at least my digital radio, and I haven't seen more than my own, is that you can set up the timeout timer as you want, anywhere from 15 seconds to 5 minutes or so, and it also has a timeout timer predictor. So it will tell me when I'm getting close to timing out, and you better let go of that button. Talk around, that's a carryover from commercial radio, and that's when maybe the security guard was on the 3rd floor and he needed to get a hold of somebody directly on the 1st floor and didn't want to go through the repeater. Then he could switch to talk around and talk directly from the 3rd floor to the 1st floor. It's now pretty much the way to go, simplex, if you will, but it doesn't leave the repeater frequency, but it doesn't go through the repeater. In other words, it's just the output channel. I think I said that right. So is there more to DMR than you thought there was? Well, if you haven't done it much with DMR, maybe I've scared you. I hopefully have not. Hopefully I've let you know that there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And this is not a picture of my grandson, but the saying is probably true. I know that the more I think, the more I get more confused I get. The code plug can also include data that translate the DMR ID numbers into call signs and names. When you're going to operate a DMR radio, you have to go one of 2 places on the internet and get an ID number. Mine is 3166309, I believe. I have it written down over at my other desk. At 70, my short-term memory is pretty good. I remember what I had for breakfast, but I don't remember what I had for dinner last night. But so there is a database from the same place that assigns those numbers, and it's growing so quickly that about every 2 weeks I update my database on my radio. This Anytone radio can hold 160,000 IDs. So if the person is not brand new and I have their ID number in my radio, I know that Joe Zacks from Old Orchard Beach is the last person that keyed up on the particular talk group, and it really is pretty neat, because unless you write down every contact that you have, all you need to do is look at the face of your radio and you know that you're talking to Joe Zacks in Old Orchard Beach. And if you're talking to Gene Petroselli in Italy, that is really kind of cool when you look at that and you realize, gee, I just had a conversation sitting here in my car waiting for my wife to come out of the store with Gene Petroselli in Italy. All of this stuff, it's amazing how much is actually residing in your radio. You don't need to tie into the internet to have all of this information available to you. Now you know why it's easier to have somebody else write the code plug, but after a while, you're going to want to play with it and really tweak it. How do you install it in your handy talkie? Well, we're going to just leave it at this. The easy way is to have someone else do it for you. The second easiest way is to do it yourself. You get a code plug program, a CPS, from the DMR Radio or the DMR radio that runs on your Windows PC. When I bought this radio, I got my code plug from the company that sold it to me, from the local retailer, and they have, and I'm not advocating for Anytone radios. I'm not advocating for the company that I bought it from. They're out in the Midwest somewhere, but they have a a online learning program that comes with it. It's called their university, and for part of the incentive to buy from them, you get access to that program, to those videos. And there's over 100 videos on different aspects of utilizing a DMR radio, and it all the way from turning it on to modifying your code plug. So that's pretty cool. You want to make sure you get the latest code plug from a website. This is the DMR Mark website that has a lot of, if you're interested in primarily DMR Mark, this is the place to get code plugs and learn more about that network. As I said, I have an interest in Florida, and this is the Fort Myers Amateur Radio Club. And as you can see, they have a DMR button there. And if you press that, then you're going to get access to their code plug database. And the MD380 is another brand of radio. You download the code plug, and there's plenty of people on the Fort Myers group that would be more than happy to give you a hand putting it onto your radio. This is between the videos and the instruction manuals that you can download. It really is much simpler than maybe it sounds. When you are writing a code plug, there's been times when I have my code plug computer sitting right next to another computer, and I'm going step by step as I watch the video on my computer that I've downloaded from the network on there, and it makes it much, much simpler. This last line, save code plugs often, I thought I was pretty smart and wasn't going to be making any mistakes, so after about 2 months, I just started writing over the code plug that I had there when I made changes to it. Well, I made some change that I have no idea today what I did because my radio went kaput, and I had to kind of start at square number one. So a good thing would be to save your code plugs with a new name every single time that you've made some modifications to it. After you've done all that, turn your handy-talkie on, and you're ready to enjoy the many features of the DMR radio. What are the features? Well, primarily the ability to talk with other hams, both locally, area-wide, statewide, and nationwide. I was on the New England talk group earlier today when I was actually working on this slideshow, and I heard a guy call, and he was actually from the town that I lived in Florida. Why he was on the New England talk group, I have no idea, but it was kind of neat to talk to somebody and actually talk about a couple of retailers that we knew and exchange some information on that. Worldwide, absolutely. I've talked to several countries. It seems like I'm talking to an awful lot of Irish folks on there and an awful lot of Italian folks. Well, talk groups connect to and connected by groups of repeaters. When you select a talk group, you're choosing a single repeater or hundreds of repeaters to talk through. Keep that in mind, because if you really just want to talk to your buddy down the street, and there are two guys who get on the Massachusetts talk group. It's the Massachusetts statewide talk group, and they talk about the traffic on Route 3 heading home from Boston virtually every day, and you would think it was the 14525. Don't know if those are still the frequency or not, but there used to be the normal repeater at 14525, and 6 or 7 of us would positively steal the repeater from other use, and these guys do it. But the thing is, they're talking over maybe 20 or 30 repeaters at the same time. How to have more than one radio in one radio, and that would be your zones. I have on my code plug many zones programmed. We talked about zones earlier, and they're very, very useful. I have the home zone, which are all of the main repeaters. And when I go up to camp, I have the repeaters that are local up there. I have already, though I just have had the radio for a couple of months and haven't been to Florida since I had it, I have all the Florida repeaters in another zone. I have a zone just for the DMR Mark repeaters and a Brandmeister zone. What the heck is Brandmeister? If you don't know, we're going to get to that. And if you want, another great feature of a DMR radio is it has a roaming capability. So I'll be taking a drive down to Florida in about 3 weeks. And I haven't done it yet, but I'm putting together mentally the roaming zone that I'm going to have. And what it will do, if I'm on the Shapley repeater and I'm getting closer to a New Hampshire repeater, that signal is stronger, my radio is going to switch over to that next repeater down the line. And theoretically, if I do it right, from Old Orchard Beach to Naples, I theoretically wouldn't have to touch my radio again, because it's going to keep going from repeater to repeater as I roam down the East Coast. So if you can take it, I got a couple of final thoughts. I mentioned hotspots a couple of times. If you're not familiar with a hotspot, this is the hotspot that I own. Then no, not literally, but figuratively speaking, I have an open spot. You can see the size of it. That's it. That's it, folks. And today, I taught a couple of different states. I didn't go out of the United States, but I was just casually listening. And that's a little iPhone, and that's a DMR radio. So you can see the size of it. It has a built-in battery. It connects with the internet, and it connects with my radio. So you program this. It has 5 different program settings. My 5 settings currently are Fusion Home, Fusion Auto, DMR Home, and Brandmeister Home and Auto. So why would a person want a hotspot? Because with the exception of those 2 repeaters, which are really DMR Mark dedicated repeaters, I wouldn't be able to use my DMR ability very much to go beyond the local area or somebody that's tied into some of those talk groups. So I can get on this and talk to Czechoslovakia if I want, if I knew how to speak Czech. Brandmeister, I talked about a couple of times. Brandmeister is just a network. It's a group of people that got together and set up a network. This video is probably at least 2 or 3 years old, this shot right here. You can see that it's saying at the time that this shot was taken, there were 1,851 repeaters signed in and 5,600 hotspots signed in. The current number, if we were to go to the Brandmeister page right now, that number would be somewhere in the vicinity of 5,000. This number would be somewhere in the vicinity of 15,000. There are approximately 3 times as many hotspots in use for DMR radio as there are repeaters. And you log in here, you get a DMR number. Down here, you can't see it because it wasn't keyed up at the time. But when you sign in, you can set up your contact on the Brandmeister network. You can put security on your hotspot so people can't use it unless you allow them. And they have, I believe it's somewhere around 1,600 talk groups that they've authorized. So if you're looking for something to talk about, you can probably find it on the Brandmeister network. And by the way, whether you're going to be on the Brandmeister network or the DMR MARC network, again, that's up to the person in control of the repeater that you're working with, or if you have a hotspot, you can just select wherever you want to transmit. The DMR MARC network was really the originator of DMR for amateur radio, and they have probably somewhere closer to 600 sites now. This is an older slide, but that's an option also. There's also a relatively new network called TGIF. They're still in the construction phase. I'll give them a year before I even pay too much attention to them, but they're really kind of excited about what they're doing. So are a lot of the amateur radio operators. And I tried to show what's available on as far as repeaters in Massachusetts. This was some of the ones that I came up with. These are DMR repeaters. You can see what the color code is to get onto the repeaters. I tried to get into the Hingham repeater when I was down visiting my son-in-law, stepson, a couple of weeks ago, but didn't have any information with me. I was trying to do it by memory. But there are, I believe, somewhere in the vicinity of 25 DMR repeaters in Massachusetts. And that is my presentation on DMR radio, and I will certainly be happy to take any questions. If I don't know the answer, I'm not going to lie to you.
Wow, you know, I'm a total novice. I knew nothing about it. I know something about it now, but man, I don't know whether I would have been one of those guys like that one that you said you listened to that turned around and sent it back. I think though you gave me the knowledge to be able to say, well, wait a minute, other people have done this, so it it may be difficult to start up, but so listen. Let's see, is I don't know if Jeff is still on. Yeah, Jeff's. I see he might have left the room because he maintains the DMR system that we use. This Jeff back because he may have some things that he would want to throw in there too to be able to help. But let's I don't know whether you want to have it be a free for all or what, but go ahead and just fire away with questions.
If I don't know the answer, Jeff will. No questions. Well, I'll add this. This is my DMR handy talkie, and you can see even though it's a pretty strong battery, it is not too big, and it has a nice color screen on it. And basically, after 3 days, I was ready to send it back. After 3 weeks, I had it working pretty well, and now after 3 months, it's my go-to radio. I do my analog work on it, and I do my DMR work on it. And one of the comments that virtually everybody talks about on this particular radio is the sound, the output sound. It's a very, very loud speaker, very clear speaker. And that's one of the advantages of DMR also. Jeff might give his opinion on this, but I think that the sound is definitely a lot clearer because of the nature of digital. You don't really kind of fade out. You're either in or you're out because it can kind of make up for some gaps in the transmission being digital, and very, very clear. Some of the other digital formats, for example, Fusion, if you're 100% Fusion, they try to keep their Fusion network, the Yaesu network, pure. But you can get into that if you have a DMR radio, for example, and you're going through a hotspot. So you're not always going to get the complete benefit of the clarity of the wide wideband and fusion radio. But I'm very happy with the audio quality of the DMR radio.
I have a
Jeff, do you have
question.
anything to add?
I got a question, Joe.
Question.
This is Rick, N1DC. That radio that you have there, the Anytone radio, how much did it cost you to get it to where it is right now?
Good question. Anytone has a, you shall not sell my radio at anything less than the suggested retail price. So this radio, I'll tell you a little bit more about it. It has Bluetooth, and it comes with a little Bluetooth wrist strap. So you can push the wrist strap if you're driving along, and this is set up, you know, in a holder in your car, so that you don't have to pick it up and you don't have to use a microphone. You can actually talk on the Bluetooth thing. So it has Bluetooth, it has GPS, and if anybody can tell me a good reason why you need APRS, it also has digital and analog APRS. I don't really want the rest of the world to know where I am. When I stop in front of the local bar and my car doesn't move for 2.5 hours, why would I want to be broadcasting that to the world? But so it has GPS, has APRS, it's Bluetooth, and it was $238. This is an 878. The 868 is a little step down. I'm not sure what the difference is, and everybody says that, even from Bridgecom Systems, which is the seller. We're not really sure what the difference is, but that radio, I believe, is $168. And they also have a portable, which is pretty darn small. It's about as small as your small analog portable, and I think that's $399, and it has 50 watts out on 2 meters and 440. It also is a 220 band on there. It's a tri-band radio, and I think it's only 5 watts out, but that's like $399. So it doesn't cost a whole lot to get into it.
Question? Joe, can you copy?
Sure.
Yeah, this is Bob, K1NOK. I have the same radio that I bought, and the question I have on it, I bought this in February down in Florida, and I think the firmware in it is 1.17. What I really want to do is change, modify, I should say, the code plug in the radio. Do I have to necessarily have the latest firmware to do that? My go-to guy and my guru, I guess, is Tom, W1ICU in Florida, who set this up for me initially. And I'm just getting back into it. I just haven't had any time in the last few months. But that was just a quick question on the firmware. Go ahead.
No, you can. What is it you want to do to the software, Bob?
I want to add some local channels. For example,
No.
I want to add Hingham.
No, you know, some of the things, I'm not sure what the 1.17 or the 1.18 changed. I have 1.18 and they have 1.19 out now, I understand. And I've heard a few comments that it's not necessarily completely ironed out, all the bugs in it. So like, you know, buying a new car, you don't want to buy the ones that were made on Monday morning. Right. And you don't want to buy the first 1,000 that were made. So I'm going to wait until that comes out. But no, unless you want to do something that 1.17 didn't support, there shouldn't be a problem. No.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you, Joe.
Sure. And they have a whole series of new stuff on that Bridgecom University.
Right.
I don't know, did you buy that from Bridgecom?
Yes, I have that, and I probably have 20 minutes in it, so I have a long way to go.
They keep reminding me once a week. They tell me
Right.
you're 57% through it. But the thing is, if you watch about 3/4 of the video and you got what you want out of it, you haven't completed it. So it's not on their computer list as having, I don't think I need too much of it anymore.
Right. Thank you.
By the way, if anybody is interested in this and you want a 1, 2, 3, 4 step-by-step guide, just send me a email. It's jdzaks@gmail. That's Zulu Alpha Kilo Sugar, jdzax@gmail.com. Just yesterday, the company we're talking about, Bridgecom, published the notice that they have a fan of theirs, a ham radio operator, who put together a step-by-step, this is how you're going to get your radio on the air. And I looked at it real briefly yesterday, only spent about 5 minutes on it, and it's pretty awesome. It's definitely worth downloading. So I'll send you that link.
Joe, you're an ARRL member. Do you have N1BIM at ARRL?
I do.
Okay, isn't that easier?
No, I don't. I may. I don't know.
Okay. Well, you just gotta go and set it up. It's free.
I could probably do Joe BIM.
You know, I want Jeff to get in here, but I just wanted to add, you know, the whole thing about these code plugs and talk groups and everything. I remember back when I first bought an FT817 radio, and one of the things that you would do in that is you would program in all the frequencies that you on all the bands, and you could have like a list of favorites. And there were a couple of websites where you could go, and you could, and let's just say the San Francisco area, for instance, somebody that lived out there built a whole thing of favorites, and you could just go there and grab that list of frequencies and download that to your radio. Is it the same thing with these code plugs that you can go to a place and like have somebody else has already done this work, and you could just go and you can use that, load that onto your radio?
Absolutely. You want to get something as close to your needs as possible, so it just is going to work for you. The company we're talking about, the retailer Bridgecom Systems, actually has a plug-and-play package. Their plug-and-play package is the radio, cables, I think a microphone comes with it, but the plug-and-play, and also a hotspot, a very good hotspot, not the one that I have, but it certainly is a very good one. And you buy this as a package, and they pre-program your code plug. The code plug is pre-programmed for your radio, for your hotspot, and you give them, you know, your county, etc., and they do all the local talk groups, and they do the, for example, if I were buying one, they put in the New England talk group, the Maine talk groups, etc., and other ones that I may request. And it comes, and I've seen, I don't know if Bob follows Bridgecom's online at all, but time after time, people will say, I got my delivery yesterday, and 7 minutes after I opened the box, I was transmitting on DMR. So yeah, and like I said, they also have a list of code plugs, and if you find one that's pretty darn close to what you need, and they're obviously only going to be selling code, giving away code plugs for the radios that they sell, so that shouldn't be a problem either. And a code plug is nothing more than software telling your radio what to do. It's not as mysterious as it sounds.
So would it be essentially that list of favorites that I said I would load into my FT817?
Correct.
Jeff, you want to jump in here, and then we'll let it go around with questions.
Sure. I just want to comment that the 4 repeaters now that I am involved in that are on the Brandmeister network are mixed mode repeaters. They do analog and they do most of the other modes, like the 145.39 and 449.9875 repeaters in West Bridgewater that have been around for a couple of years now. Those will do DMR on the Brandmeister network, D-Star, Fusion, NXDN, and P25, as well as West Bridgewater doesn't do analog. So we just recommend that you look at your busy light, make sure nobody else is transmitting on another mode before you get on there and start transmitting. And just that on the Brandmeister, on slot 1, we usually recommend people on time slot 1 use the national talk group, like the TAC 310s, the 3100s, 93, 91, things like that. And then the more localized ones, talk group 9 for just the repeater that you're on. Or if you use the radio or the talk group ID of the repeater, like the Marshfield repeater is 3125 541, if you program that as your talk group, you can get on that talk group whether you're on the repeater on time slot 2 or you're on a hotspot, and you can just be on that repeater. You don't have to tie up a whole bunch of repeaters or anything else. It can be a good gathering spot if you're away from the area. And we are also doing DMR on 220 as of a week and a half ago. My 220 repeater in Norwell has been revamped, and we've got one of these MMDVM devices on there that will do all the digital modes, but since the only ones that have radios available for 220 are D-Star and DMR, we got those 2 modes on. And again, that's on Brandmeister. So, and like with all the discussion on talk groups, when I was, programming code plugs to the 900 radios, it would be like a one-size-fits-all thing where there really weren't many changes. But with DMR, you really do, if at all possible, want to get into being able to edit things yourself and customize it for your own needs, where what I have in my radio might not be the best thing for you because just the differences and everything. So my Anytone, I do have that same Anytone HT. Unfortunately, the VHF side on it died on me. It was intermittent. Every once in a while I would notice that I'm not hearing anything and not able to get out on VHF, but UHF is fine. So I had purchased that from Connect Systems. Unfortunately, they told me to send it out there. They'll take a look at it and see if they can do anything. I don't know if they can swap out any parts in it or whatever. I don't really know the exact procedure on these Anytones, if they have any kind of service for them. But at least I got good support from the manufacturer, or from the retailer that I bought it from. And we'll see what happens with that. But I also do have the mobile, the 578, which does 220, so you can use my 220 repeater if you happen to have that. And that's about it for me, I think.
Well, thank you, Jeff. That's one of the rate. I mean, I'm from what I've seen, I read the ads in QST, and I know I've seen a lot of advertisements for Anytone, and I think they did a review within the last month or two in QST about the one that might be the one that you have there. So the thing is, it doesn't sound like it's a major investment, just from what Joe had said there about the pricing on the HT. So, I mean, if somebody has an interest in doing it, I would think maybe they could watch some of the videos that Joe had talked about and just jump in, give it a try. So anybody else have any questions here for Joe?
Yeah, I had a quick question. The 2 different networks that were mentioned, DMR Mark and Brandmeister, can all DMR radios do both networks? Is there any distinction between it? Obviously, yours is because you've had it set up for both in your talk.
If I'm going through a repeater, it's up to the repeater to make sure they have the connection to the network. I just need to get into the repeater using the color code and the time slot that they're telling me to use. If I'm going through my hotspot, remember I said there were 5 different options on there. So the way I'm getting into DMR Mark or the way I'm getting into Brandmeister, I have to be aware of the various routing to get into it. But otherwise, they're identical. They use the time slots. Well, when you're on your hotspot, on the one that I use, the time slot and the color code are both set at 1. So that's the only, once you get past that guard at the gate, the time slot and the color code, you're out there talking to folks without worrying about that. So yeah, they're identical in process, I believe, pretty much. I think that the Brandmeister equipment may be more modern because they've only been around for a few years, and DMR Mark started with all Motorola equipment. And DMR Mark seems to be focused more on, and I have to be careful because the 2 repeaters that I use are both DMR Mark, so I don't want to get thrown out, more focused on older views, that we should use this to communicate business. When I mean business, ham radio business. And with Brandmeister, and from what I see of this new TGIF Friday network, it's a little more free flowing. There are groups that want to talk about politics. There are groups that want to talk about their favorite gun clubs and things like that, which, you know, there's plenty of space out there, so allow them to. But maybe the politics of the groups are a little bit different, but the radios are the same.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much. And last one, is there, I applied, I don't know, quite a while ago for the DMR ID. Everybody has to apply for a DMR ID. These days, do you have any idea, does that take quite a long time? Or is it was pretty quick when I got mine.
I got mine, I don't even think I shut off the computer. It was, you know, maybe a couple hours later. I've heard people say recently that it's taking, you know, 3 or 4 days, and where's my ID? But you go to that radioid.net and you give them the information. They only delay is they're going to make sure, in fact, that N1BIM really is Joe Zach's and that it's a legitimate request, and out comes your number.
So,
Okay, yeah, you actually had the URL off the top of your head, radioid.net. Okay. All right, good. Thank you very much, Joe.
You bet.
we had had a little discussion, and Marty can punch in on this. We had a little discussion about, because I had made a suggestion a long time, quite a while back, that you know, maybe it would be something worthwhile for the club. This is back when we used to be able to get together over at the club, but in person. But you know, to be able to have at the club have a DMR radio, and Marty had started to do some looking into it, and it seemed as though clubs maybe would have a problem getting an ID. Or Jeff, do you know an answer for that? And then I was going to give it to Marty to explain what he had told me.
I have seen clubs with IDs. Back in the early days when people were kind of getting multiple IDs, if you look at some of the early numbers, it used to be, you know, 3125 XXX was Massachusetts IDs, and you'll see people in there like the Walpole Emergency Management or something, WA1PLE. You'll see like 3 or 4 different WA1PLE IDs in there. So I don't think it would be a problem at all to get one ID for K1USN. I don't see that being an issue at all.
And the radio has the code plug has the ability to hold multiple IDs. So if Jeff and I are sharing a radio, we just set up that I'm the one using it at that point in time, and it would you know, identify me.
Joe, with your experience at this point, have you noticed any limitations in DMR?
The limitation is that there's about a 3-second time between the time that you unkey and the entire process has gone through the system. So a lot of the old timers who are used to kind of getting, even before, you know, the tail goes away on the repeater, just immediately keying up as soon as the person they're talking to, they can do that. And Jeff talked earlier about some different talk group numbers, and I believe the DMR talk group for worldwide is talk group 1. And I took talk group 1 out of my radio because you get guys going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and not letting the repeater reset. You can't get off of that frequency sometimes. There's actually, it's the talk group 4000. You can push the 4000 like you're making a transmission on talk group 4000, and that's the disconnect button. But I've found that if you don't have at least a little bit of a break in there, you're stuck there. So I've had to go back into the software, you know, bring up my computer, go into the software from my hotspot and disconnect on the software, because some of these guys, particularly, you know, everybody's very sensitive about stuff, but I'm going to say the word foreigners. You know, a couple of guys in Italy, a couple of guys in Germany are going back and forth, and you don't get a break for 5 or 10 minutes, and you got to, if you really, and it takes over your radio. You don't leave that. So you got to sometimes go into the software to get out of it. That. Otherwise, I love it. I really do.
Wow, that's great to know. Thanks, Joe.
You bet.
I have one question, Joe. You've talked about Windows PCs, never mentioned an Apple at all. Is this stuff compatible with Apple?
You get that question on the internet at least 2 or 3 times a week. And I've answered the question a couple of times, and I tell people, the bottom line answer is, Len, that the code plug software is not compatible with Apple. However, people will tell you to get one of those programs that work on top of the Apple software and emulate, Microsoft. I don't know, I'd go that way. I have a computer in my workshop downstairs where I have a DMR radio, and I bought it at some retailer, at a Labor Day sale or something, and it does the job just fine, and it cost me $125. So, I wouldn't. I tried that software on my Apple computer at one point in time, and I didn't like the way it kind of messed things up. So yeah, pretty much you got to plan on using a Windows computer.